What is going on, everyone? Today I'm going to be giving you a spoiler-free review for Longlegs. So this is a brand new serial killer horror movie that just came out, and it's been getting a lot of buzz over the past few weeks. If you've been on Twitter, you've probably seen people giving their early first impressions. You've probably seen the Rotten Tomatoes scores being insanely high. You've probably seen a lot of the marketing where it's purposely not showing Nicolas Cage's face in this movie. It's trying to keep it for the film itself. And they've been doing a great job with that. I think the marketing is probably some of the best marketing I've seen for a horror movie, especially a horror movie like this. It is a smaller indie horror film. It's not this large, big budget movie. So it is definitely a bit different in how they're going to go about their marketing process, but it's all been great and it's looked amazing. I've been so hyped about it ever since I heard it being compared to Silence of the Lambs. So I was all on board. And here is my spoiler-free review. We're going to get into the positives, then the negatives, and then we'll give it a rating out of 10. So starting off with the positives, this movie is really unsettling. All the reviews talking about how terrifying this movie is. Some people saying it's the scariest movie of all time. I wouldn't go as far as to say that. I don't think it's the scariest movie of all time. I don't even think it's in the conversation for the scariest. Maybe top, like, I don't know. I've seen what, like 250 horror movies at this point. Probably top 30 maybe. It's definitely a scary movie for sure, but I wouldn't put it at like the top of that, you know what I mean? So it definitely isn't there, but it does scare you in a very different way, and more of an unsettling, anxiety inducing way. You know, I felt like I was on the edge of my seat for a lot of the runtime. I felt nervous for a lot of the runtime. It wasn't the same types of fears that other movies give you that make you, you know, scared to go to bed at night. Like, not that kind of scary. It's just more so like just an unnerving feeling that you have throughout the entire time. And that's due to a mixture of things. Obviously, the sound design is a big part. The sound design in this movie is amazing. There are some moments where it's just the sound that terrifies you. It's not necessarily like any actual thing happening, but there's just a sort of sound, whether it's something really quick or just something kind of like lingering. The soundtrack and the way they utilize that as well, all really unnerving. Some of the imagery is terrifying. It's not a gory movie at all. If you're a type of person that gets really, you know, grossed out by gory things, there's not too much of that here. There's one scene in particular that is very gory, but it's kind of a quick scene, so it doesn't necessarily stay, you know, overstay its welcome. But if you just hate gore, like, no, it's not a Terrifier 2 type of movie. You're not going to be seeing people doing all. It's not like that. It's not that kind of movie. But there are some moments that do definitely make your stomach crawl a bit, and it looks really realistic. So definitely adds to the unnerving, unsettling feeling that this movie has. And of course, the performances, and mostly by Nicolas Cage, who is playing the main serial killer here. Now, he is great in this. Like, this is probably his best performance I've ever seen him in. And that's not really a surprise to me because I've only really seen Nicolas Cage in, I don't want to say goofy roles, but roles that are meant to be a little more comedic. And, you know, I've seen him in a couple of serious movies, but usually they're not like that serious. This is definitely the most serious role for him, and he still is playing a character that in some moments is a little comedic, but not in the usual comedic way. It's comedic in the way where it's just so unnerving and unsettling. It sort of creates a little bit of a nervous laughter in you, and it did that for me at least a couple times in this movie. And I love how a lot of the scares in this, they're not centered around just cheap jump scares. I know a lot of horror movies just love to do that, just make, you know, make people terrified just by loud noises out of nowhere and just, you know, scary face come out in the screen. There's a couple of those in here for sure, but there's not like, it's not full of them. And when they do use them, they're meant to service the story in some way, shape, or form. They don't ever feel forced, and that is really important. Also, just the way it's shot as well. There's a lot of shots where you'll have the character just there on the screen, and then the space on the right or the left or whatever it may be is just very much filled with stuff going on. There's a lot of stuff happening, and you kind of sometimes can see something in there. I'm not going to spoil anything if you find it yourself, but sometimes you'll find little hidden things in the background of shots that they kind of put there. Just if you do see it, it'll be like, holy shit. And it might matter, it might not matter in the moment. You don't really know right away, but it really is creepy when you do actually point those things out and you do notice them. And we talked about Nicolas Cage being fantastic in this. We might as well talk about Maika Monroe as well, because she was also fantastic. And I've seen her in It Follows as well as Watcher. Both are horror movies, and both are, you know, she's great in those as well. So I knew she was definitely going to be great in here, and she is a really standout character. She plays Agent Lee Harker, and there are so many interesting things about this character. It's one of those characters that you can tell there's something up with her. You don't really know what it is. And over the course of the movie, you do learn more about her. You learn more about her history. And there's a lot to talk about there. There's a lot going on there. Every single line of dialogue and every single line delivery has some sort of meaning and importance to the story. And you can, like I said, you can piece it together in the beginning. There's a couple interactions she has with this one kid in the movie, for example, and you can tell, you know, something's up there, but you just don't know what yet. And all these things add into the mystery of the movie. It is very much a mystery, sort of similar to a lot of serial killer horror movies where they're trying to solve something. They're trying to figure out why this person's killing, you know, what the pattern is, who the person is, and all of that is just trying to be uncovered. And there is a really interesting mystery there. Sure, is some of it maybe a little predictable? It really just depends on who the person is. If you're able to piece it together before someone else, then sure, maybe it will be predictable for you. But for others, it won't be predictable and you'll have no idea what's coming next. And I do think all the puzzle pieces that are here are interesting enough, and when they are put together eventually, you do get a satisfying conclusion to this story. And it was something that, based on the marketing, you would probably have no idea is actually going to be the case. I personally had no idea when I saw the marketing. I thought this movie was going to be very different than what it ended up being. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just letting you know you're probably not going to be able to predict exactly what this movie's like just based on the trailers alone. There is a lot to it that is very much not what I expected. I love a lot of the themes to this movie. A lot of it has to do with childhood innocence and how sacred that is. And there's a lot of religious themes thrown in there too, centered around that. And I can't really say much more without spoiling things, but they do a absolutely great job with touching on that concept. There's a lot of these unsettling flashbacks to prior murders that do kind of relate to what's going on in this story, and they're all shot so just, oh, they're probably the most terrifying parts of the movie. They use a different aspect ratio, which I always appreciate when movies do that, when they do flashbacks. And the movie takes place in the 90s, so when you get some of these flashbacks, they take place in like the 70s and 80s and stuff, and they are just, I love how they change the aspect ratio for them, and every single shot in them, it's just shot to perfection, man. I absolutely loved those scenes. And again, just like I said before with the mystery, you don't really fully understand what all those scenes mean until a bit later, which is one of those types of movies where you do have to kind of get through quite a bit of it to start kind of piecing together what exactly is going on. You might be confused for a decent point of this film. I was personally confused for a lot of it as well. But once you start to learn what the hell's going on, it starts to make a lot more sense. Lastly, the movie's just competently made. Like, you know, there's a lot of movies you'll see where you just feel like, okay, there's something going on here. They either rushed it, or they just didn't have enough money to do this, what they wanted to do, or something along those lines. But I really didn't feel much of that in this movie. It felt like what Osgood Perkins wanted to do, Osgood Perkins, he's the director, he pretty much did exactly what he wanted here. I did not feel like any of it had to be stripped away. I don't know if the behind the scenes, I don't know if there maybe was some stuff that had to be taken away. I don't feel that way. I feel like he did exactly what he wanted to do for the story, and he delivered it exactly the way he wanted, which feels good to see, because a lot of times I'll watch a movie and I'll be like, oh, I feel like they cut stuff out of here. I feel like they did this. I feel like they had to rush. I didn't feel that here. I didn't feel that at all. And I guess that makes sense just given the type of movie it is, but it just feels like a lot of people who were really passionate about this wanted to tell this story, wanted to put it together, and they knew what the hell they were doing. So it was a very solid watch. I really enjoyed it. But there are a couple of negatives. So getting to the negatives, one thing that really bothers me with a lot of horror movies, and it's one of those things where it's like, there's reasons why in the movie, kind of, but I just don't buy most of the reasons. And this is just a simple, why not call the cops, right? There are, I think, one or two moments in the movie where it's like that, where the character, something's happening, there's someone watching them, there's someone coming after them, and they just don't think to call the police. That's like the first thing I feel like anyone should ever try to do. And yeah, you can just write that up as they just weren't, you know, thinking in the moment. They were so terrified they didn't think to do that. But it's gonna bother me a little bit. At least writing them to attempt to call the police and maybe failing at it, that could work a bit better, but it's not a big deal. It didn't ruin the scene at all. It's actually one of my favorite scenes in the movie, and yet it's the scene I'm talking about right now. But like I said, it's really not a big deal at the end of the day. And lastly, and this is kind of also a small thing because I really like this movie a lot, so it's really not a big deal, but I do feel like the reveals about what the hell's going on in the story, what the hell's actually happening with this mystery, although I like the majority of it and I think it really works, I kind of felt like I wanted a little bit more. Like, I feel like it was missing something, and I almost can't really put that into words fully, but there was something there at the end that I felt like if it was just a couple extra minutes, maybe a couple extra things on top of what was already happening, that would have kind of pieced it together at least a little bit better. Like, I really don't know how else to say it other than it just felt like we needed a little bit more. It's a pretty short movie. It's an hour, 40 minutes, but I almost felt like an extra 10 minutes with this end could have really benefited the movie quite a bit and maybe could have made some of these scenes at the end work a little bit better for me. But I still was satisfied with the reveals. I still was satisfied with the end. I just wanted a little more to it, maybe a little more story, a little bit more context. And then I think I would have been fully satisfied, even though I already was satisfied. But I'm going to give the movie an 8.5 out of 10. I think it's definitely deserving of being a great movie. I really wanted to think it's like a 10 out of 10. I was hoping this was going to be that one horror movie that just blows me away and it's a 10 out of 10, but unfortunately didn't quite get there. You know, a lot of people were comparing this to The Silence of the Lambs and Seven, and I gotta be honest, I don't think it's that similar to those movies. Like, they are calling it a modern Silence of the Lambs, and I was like, I don't know. The only similarities to me are it's a serial killer horror movie and the main character is a female FBI agent. Like, that's the only comparisons I really could make. Maybe the look of the serial killer, maybe like stuff like that, sure, but the story, the everything happening there, like, no, they're very different movies. Seven as well, very different movies, but there are some comparisons to be made, and I think they're completely fair comparisons. If you like those movies, you'll probably like this, and vice versa. So let me know your guys' thoughts in the comment section down below. I will see you guys all in my next one. Peace out.